Welcome to Old Woman Creek National Estuarine Research, Reserve, and State Nature Preserve. According to local legend, Old Woman Creek takes its name from an elderly American Indian woman who drowned herself in the creek after a family tragedy. Hence the name, Old Woman Creek, or so the story goes. Besides this colorful tale, Old Woman Creek has many other stories to tell. And if we study her carefully, there's a lot we can learn. Although much of Ohio's Lake Erie shoreline is developed, a few areas remain relatively undisturbed. One of the most significant of these is Old Woman Creek. This freshwater estuary is located on the south-central shore of Lake Erie, about 3 miles east of Huron. In 1980, Old Woman Creek was designated the 7th National Estuarine Research Reserve in the United States. Of the 26 reserves across the nation's coastlines, Old Woman Creek is the only one on the Great Lakes. To further guarantee its protection, the site is also an Ohio State Nature Preserve managed by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. This 571-acre site, the smallest estuarine reserve in the country, serves as a scientific field laboratory, a birdwatching sanctuary, an outdoor classroom, and a protected habitat. Where land and water meet, diverse habitats occur. The Old Woman Creek Reserve contains freshwater marshes, upland forests, a creek, a barrier beach, and nearshore Lake Erie. The reserve's main goal is to ensure long-term protection of the estuary and to provide continual research, monitoring, and education.
When did you begin working at Old Woman Creek?
I came here on New Year's Day, 1979, and that became the beginning of Old Woman Creek
And where did
Reserve.
you live?
At the time, I was living in we called it the Murray House, I think.
Murray House.
There was a large house there. We called that the Murray House. And then there was a smaller cottage. In fact, Dr. Dave and his wife lived in there for a little bit, didn't you?
Yeah, that was there. You had a couple of was it wildlife? Not wildlife, but watercraft officers living in the house at the time.
What were your responsibilities as manager of Old Woman Creek?
A lot of different things, but making sure that people who came to visit Old Woman Creek were there just to do that, because every so often we had people that were trying to cut down trees or kill animals or almost anything back way up in the reserve. And sometimes that was a headache early on, but it wasn't long before, I went to the State Highway Patrol program managers. I forget what it was called, the Highway Patrol training, I guess, that training program. And yeah, and that's where I learned how to do law enforcement, was through the Highway Patrol Academy.
And when did you hire Dr. Dave Klarer?
When did I hire Dr. David Klarer?
I started 1 month after.
1 month after.
In fact, I was here in the middle of January of '79.
Yeah.
In fact, Gene's first day, he sat in on the interviews of those that were looking for research, the interviews for a research coordinator, potential job as research coordinator. And there were about 5 or 6 I gathered that applied for the job, and I was the one that was offered it. And soon thereafter, when they offered it to me, I nearly lost it, because Dick Mosley and Dennis Anderson were making the call to me. I was telling Linda this, that Dick Mosley kept saying, well, what's the most expensive piece of equipment are you going to need? What is it? And I said, well, probably a microscope. And Dick Mosley was used to using the little $600 microscopes. And he said, no, what's the most expensive piece of equipment? And I said, probably a microscope. And finally he said, okay, well, what's it cost? And I said, when my supervisor bought one compound microscope 10 years ago, it was $10,000. And there's just dead silence on the telephone at the time.
Yes.
But
And Dick Mosley was who at the time?
He was the chief
Chief.
of natural areas.
Mm-hmm.
He was a great chief too, because
He was.
interestingly that he got the microscope for me. In fact, the whole thing came in about $15,000, and with a camera and all the other attachments with it. And he had to go to, the federal government said, well, what's this cost? And Dick Mosley said, well, look, we put in for 2 microscopes, we bought 2 microscopes. We're off a little bit on the price, but we got 2 microscopes. And the feds went, oh, okay, and just let it ride. So, but Dick was very good at supporting us here.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of at the start, were the funds for this provided by the state or by the federal government?
The funds for land acquisition was all federal, but our salaries were covered. That was the state match.
State match.
When was the first visitor center built?
You talking about this
This
building?
building that we're in now,
Mhm.
yes.
I don't.
81, wasn't it? It was opened in 81.
Yeah, probably
Isn't
been.
that right about Linda?
I think they were building it in '79 and '80 because it took a while to put it all together.
Well, it started in 80,
Yeah.
and we built it. I think we moved into it in 81, but it would have been late 81, maybe September, October 81, something like that we moved into it.
And it's still here.
That's right.
Has it been expanded since 81?
Yes. There's been some additions to it. Not necessarily any additions for the general public as much as for the people who worked here and needed space.
The classroom.
Oh, the one
The
classroom.
classroom here was
That's it. Mm.
was built in the second, and that would have been
85.
85 is when it. I think we moved into it because it was here when the first NARES conference was held, and the first NARES conference out of Washington D.C. was held here, because that goes back to when Ronald Reagan became president, and the person he appointed for NOAA basically said his job was to do away with all these programs, and so the NARES could, the National Sanctuary Program could not meet in Washington again. So Dick Mosley was at the meeting with you, and he basically said, fine, we'll meet in Ohio next year. And that's what started the whole process of going from reserve to reserve each year.
For the annual meeting.
For the annual meeting, that's right.
There are other programs involved other than research and management. What other programs were involved here?
I think education was the big thing.
Yeah, we did a lot of
Because
education.
When we were founded here, there was local opposition, because the thought was, how could you take such prime developable land off the tax rolls? And because that some people were thinking, well, boy, you can build condos and dig out the estuary and put in a nice marina, and look at all the money that would be built into the local economy. So a lot of the research that I did at first was, why was this area important to the local area and to Lake Erie? And so that's kind of where we started with the research. In fact, the first big research project we had was a study of cancers in bullheads, because in the Black River there used to be a steel coking plant, and the bullheads, which are bottom feeders, they were finding greater than 90% visible lesions or cancers in the bullheads, and they compared them with the system here, and the cancers in here were less than 10%. So it was one of these things that ultimately the result of that research was that they went through and they actually dug out all the bottom sediments in the Black River to get rid of all what remained to the coking plant.
What about the outreach program for the community? Was there an education component? And who was in charge of that?
Oh, who was our educator?
Linda.
Linda Fikes.
You were the original outreacher.
Oh, I suppose.
The community and the first
Yeah.
groups that were at
Yeah.
the dorm. We didn't have any visitor center, we had no
Mm-mm.
trails. So
Right.
everything was done right on site.
Everything was done over there because
Outreach to the,
this area was not owned
Mm-mm.
at the time,
No,
in '79 when
well-
we started. Basically,
We just had we called it the Murray.
the Murray property.
Murray property is what we got first. And there was a large house there, and then there was a little cottage. In fact, David lived in the little cottage for a while, he and his wife. And we operated out of there for a long time until the state decided that we needed a complete new operation, and that's when they started working on this property to build a place that the public could come to, a good parking lot, hiking trails, and rebuilding classrooms and laboratories. What else do we have in here?
That's basically it.
That's pretty much the way it
Who
was.
laid out the trails? Who decided where the trails would be and who did the work?
Must have been us.
Well, it was, what's his name, in central office?
Mike Colvin?
No, no,
Right,
no. Oh, gosh. No, it was Steve's assistant came out.
So somebody from central office came out to
And-
help you lay out the trails?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
basically, everything was done by the staff of Fruit, maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much so, yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Well, what was his name? Gosh. He came in, he did the electrical work for us. That, because of one of the first jobs we had in the summer of '79 was converting the laundry room into a mini laboratory.
Yeah.
So we could do work here
At the Murray House?
at the Murray
Yeah.
House,
Mhm.
yes. And he came up and he did the wiring for us, and then we put in the counters, and actually one of the managers in the western part of the state came over and built our cabinets and put them in. So we had a place that we could do research, even though our research equipment was basically a hot water kit. Because that's all we had at the beginning. But then we bought balances and, as I said, the microscope and other things like this. And it was a situation that we were able to demonstrate that by buying the equipment and doing our analysis in-house, it was much, much cheaper than sending it out. Because at the time, I think they were charging anywhere between $50 and $100 a sample. And, you know, we could equip the entire lab for $4,000 or $5,000, and that was good for basically for a long, long time. In fact, we're still using parts of it today.
And early on, we had to get accustomed to people who for years had been coming here to do fishing and hiking and shooting deer. Then they were just, for a while, were difficult to deal with. Then we always say they sent me to the Highway Patrol Academy so I could learn how to do law enforcement. And it certainly was needed, and thank heavens they were really good teachers, because I learned a lot of how to do law enforcement without beating people up or hurting them, mostly. Once in a while you had to do that, though. was, I really enjoyed working here, and I think David did too.
Yes.
Most of the time, and Linda Fikes, when did you come here? 80. Mm-hmm.
She was here almost from the beginning.
Yeah, so
Volunteer.
the three of us were actually pretty much
The staff.
the staff.
But
Yeah,
wasn't Linda a volunteer for a couple of years?
maybe, sure, I'm sure, but as I recall, she volunteered a lot of time for free, but she was really helpful to us as having somebody that knew about basic education and people. She was good at that.
And she was she eventually hired?
Oh, certainly, yes. Mm-hmm.
I painted all the signs, all the
Yes,
church signs over there
yes.
for about a year.
I think
Because they were all hand routed.
Yeah. And I think, I remember that you were in coveralls about half of the time, zipped up in coveralls working on that stuff. So she was our special person to do things that David and I either couldn't or didn't have time to. And for the most part, well, not the most part, she was and is really important to this place, and it's never changed anything.
We also started the library over there.
Yes, that's right.
I'd say that, it's not.
Oh, yeah, and she started the library over at the Murray House too, and that was a really good place to work from.
Can you talk a little bit about the green construction project, which was one of the remodeling phases, the last big remodeling phase here?
Yeah, it's supposed to be, what should I say? That's true, a sustainable.
Repeat what she said.
Sustainable building that could be taken care of, and it takes a lot of maintenance to keep up a large facility like this. It's mostly wood siding at the time, and had to climb ladders and just to do any basic maintenance on the facility itself.
What about the construction materials themselves used in the building?
We were buying, I think we tried to buy new basic materials that was available at the time. And I don't know if we paint them. We did a lot of painting. as I recall.
I was not involved
I
in
don't
that,
remember
so I
that
really don't have
too
a
much
clue.
about that, actually.
Who were the architects on this green project?
Oh, was Ralph Roberts? Wasn't it? Ralph Roberts?
I think he's the one, yes.
Yeah, he was a.
Heather Young.
And Heather Yellen was a young lady that worked with him, and she was really helpful to all of that part of the program.
Can you talk at all about your involvement with the National Estuarine Research Reserve System? What did that involve? It's a nationwide program that Old Creek was part of.
Across the country, there was estuarine research reserves, and at first, I think they might have looked at us as kind of a puny little operation.
We were estuarine-like.
Yeah, because there's nobody would recognize that this was actually an estuary, because they were thinking about everything was salt water at that time. It was an estuary.
Well, it's interesting. The term estuary was used in the Detroit River as it flowed into Lake Erie in 1915. The classic definition of an estuary came out about 1957, I think, where it was the
Rivers meet the sea and
freshwater
mixed
meeting the sea
together.
and being. So, quite honestly, the term estuary was used in the Great Lakes about 40 years before the quote traditional unquote definition came up. So, but again, it's, the estuary is two different water masses meeting and mixing and it's in the lower reaches of the river. It's not in the lake itself, but in the lower reaches of the river, where the meeting and the mixing occur. And it's two different water masses, so you've got, unfortunately, well, fortunately for us, we don't have a salt gradient to worry about like they do in the marine system. But we do have still the two different water masses meeting. And in our case, it's kind of interesting that the water in the lake has a lower chemical content than the water flowing into it. So ours was kind of the reverse, that we had more chemically rich creek water mixing with chemically poor lake water. So ours was kind of the reverse, but again, we still had all the other criteria for a quote estuary, unquote.
Civilian Conservation Corps helped put up fences around delineating the property. Is that how you remember it?
Yeah, they did some of that for sure.
Okay, so can you say that the Civilian Conservation Corps helped with delineating the boundaries of the preserve?
Yes, that's correct. They were very helpful in delineating the boundaries of the reserve. And because for the most part, when we first came here, nobody thought we had any right to be here. This was not our business to be here.
A lot of the land that we got were just basically farm fields.
Yeah.
So.
And they weren't used as farm fields anymore, just grown up, going back to forest, and it was a different place. In fact, there were some that thought this is never going to work here in Ohio, because the real reserves were in other states, They don't think much about us.
It was kind of interesting that, I mean, I went to a conference and mine said estuarine-like on the form rather than estuary.
Yeah, they didn't recognize us for a while as a real estuary.
They didn't really realize it. But then they came out here. I think the real change was in '85 when they met here, and the managers. Of course, at the time, I was the only research coordinator in the system outside of one in Washington. I was the only on-site research coordinator for, I think, about 7 or 8 years. So it was great, because my conference, when we broke into different sections, it was just me by myself. So I had my meetings were not at all contentious like a lot of the others were. So it was very interesting. In fact, I was hoping that I could meet, say, maybe in a pub or something. But no, I was the only one, and it was when we first started to get research coordinators of any number was the conference in New York in 1990. Is when there were about 6 or 7 research coordinators.
How about volunteers? Can you talk about the volunteers that helped?
Sure. Linda Fikes, the number one that helped us in her time. She came here, and I don't know that. What did you think you were coming here to do? Nor did we. And then as it turned out is that any time that suddenly something new came up that we'd never heard of before, would see if she could fit into that role to help us. And one thing that she never quit doing was whatever was needed to be done that he and I couldn't do or didn't have time to do, she would somehow figure a way to do that. And Marge and is it Glenn Bernhardt and Phoebe, their daughter, were early volunteers that came here, and they were really helpful too. That was the beginning of our volunteers, supposedly, isn't it, early on,
do
that
they do?
family.
What do they do?
Whatever seemed to be needed. They'd just show up, and maybe it's mowing grass, painting something, just anything.
Helping with programs.
Yeah, and assisting us with programs. Just
Litter pickup.
litter
Cleaning
pickup.
up the beach.
That's
In fact, that was one of the things about the family, is they would do anything that we thought we needed to be done that we couldn't personally do it. Boy, they'd be right there and do it.
And wasn't Marge later an employee?
Yes,
so was Phoebe.
And Phoebe was too. That was the daughter. They were both employees here. You know, those were the good old days, huh?
The advisory council.
Yeah, talk a little bit about the advisory council.
I think that was a requirement of the national program. There had to be an advisory council. And it was kind of interesting that they chose people. I mean, there were 3 academics that were sitting on the advisory council. Then there were also local citizens and some state representatives also. So you got a mixture of everyone on it. And we were very fortunate that the chairman for the longest period, for a long time, was Ed Herdendorf. And he was director of Ohio Sea Grant.
Mm-hmm.
And quite honestly, if he had wanted to, he could have crushed our research program here, but he was very, very supportive of the program. In fact, a lot of our researchers came here on the suggestion of Dr. Herdendorf. So he was very important in getting the research program up and running.
Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of people who were thinking that it would look like competition between the two and wouldn't work at all. And it turns out that's not the way it worked.
But it was kind of interesting that wetlands have always been kind of a stepchild
Mm-hmm.
of the research program. For example, you had Sea Grant that was actually working on the lake proper, and then you had Heidelberg College that was working on the rivers in this.
Mm-hmm.
But that in between area, no one was really looking at, and so we fit into a nice niche that was not being filled, and I think that helped us get the program going. And also, once we got started, we had researchers over here from Heidelberg. In fact, Ken Krieger was one of the first outside
Heidelberg
researchers to come
College.
here and do work, and he was looking at the sediments and pollutants coming from agricultural watersheds. And so we were working that. And then we got people involved later on that were looking at the breakdown of contaminants in the estuary. Because it's kind of interesting that Old Woman Creek Estuary is Lake Erie's last natural defense against any pollution coming down Old Woman Creek.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that we found from the very first, some of the first work I found, I was not able to sample as often as I should because there was me. And you know, working up the samples, I could sample maybe once a day. And Ken Krieger was able to come in and put in automatic samplers, and he had a whole lab
Mm-hmm.
there that could analyze them. And he found out that this system could actually, the estuary could take out about half of the phosphorus that was coming into the system, so it was not going on into the lake to cause the problems that we now know.
Actually improving
All right,
the quality of that.
And about a quarter of the nitrate that was coming in here. And later work done by Yo Chin, Dr. Yo Chin and his people at Ohio State University actually found out that this area was great for removing a lot of pollutants that we wouldn't think about. For example, one interesting one is, for example, ibuprofen. If you take ibuprofen, you have to take it in far excess of what you really need. So it passes through you. It will pass through a wastewater treatment plant totally unchanged.
Mm-hmm.
Unless the fish are having headaches, it's not really that useful for them either. But they found out that here, in Old Woman Creek Estuary, a natural estuary, that the high nitrate was helping to break down ibuprofen much faster than it would under normal circumstances. So, and they also found this with some of the various pesticides that were being used, that they're broken down here so that it doesn't flow into the lake and cause problems there.
Yeah, because from the southern end, there was a lot of things coming off of farmlands into our estuary.
Well, as I said, when we first started here, the big thing was convincing the general public as to why a natural area like this was important to them. And so we were looking at nutrients, pollutants was a big thing. We had some work done on the fish that actually use the estuary, lake fish that come in and actually use the estuary for their fish eggs and things like this. So, but there are about 40 different species of fish that actually use Old Woman Creek estuary.
And that was a surprise to lots of people.
Oh yeah.
They had no idea that that variety was here.
One problem is, I mean, the estuary, the mouth will open and close, it's supposed to open and close naturally. But in the spring, sometimes when it was closed, we'd have people out here digging it out because they see all those poor fish that wanted to get into the estuary. Or in the fall, poor fish wanted to get out of the estuary. And so they would come and dig out the mouth, not realizing that it's a natural process. It fills in when there's enough storm activity in the watershed. It will blow the mouth open, and that's kind of the natural cycle. But they saw all those poor fish that couldn't get in or get out. In fact, that was one thing you had to fight constantly, was people coming out and wanting to dig out the mouth.
Oh, yes. The people from, what's next door group?
Oberlin Beach Association.
Oberlin Beach Association. Eventually.
I think so, yeah, it's
Eventually.
yeah, well, I mean,
Well, it took,
you know, it was not the same people all the time. It was always a different group. So, you know, when they come in here and start to dig, and we'd go down and explain to them why this is a natural process and why we wanted to keep it natural. And, you know, that it was not harming the fish the way that they thought it was. That, you know, that it took time, but yeah, they caught on. And the funny thing is that
many years.
the one fish that they were concerned about was the carp. Well, carp's not a native species anyway. Carp was brought in to feed some of the laborers, and so it's mainly a fish of Europe. It's not a fish of this area. So,
Can you tell us about why the Gilmore house was eventually demolished and what took its place?
When we came here, the Gilmore house was what there pretty much was, plus a cottage. And after a while, it was becoming old, and we were using it for a lot of different things. And we needed a real center. And in fact, we didn't have a real visitor center anyway, so we needed a visitor center. A lot of people wanted to come and see what the heck, what are those people doing here? And it became kind of a central focus to make that into a visitor center.
I think one of the reasons was initially when we built this facility here, we were going to use the Gilmore house or the Murray house or the Schmidt house, whatever you called it, for housing. And that was going to be our dorms. But then they went through and they found out that on the roof there were 7 layers of shingles. They didn't bother to take them off, they just added a new layer. And so they found that the cost of bringing that up to code, because they figured they'd have to replace the entire roof.
Yeah.
Because, you know, that wasn't done in those days. It was much, much cheaper to build the dorm that we have rather than try and refurbish the Murray house up to code. Now we did keep part of it, the garage and the little dorm or the little laboratory that we built was the only thing left of the Murray house right now, and that's used. The lab is now used for storage, and the dorm, or the garage was used by DNAP for a long time, just for storage and for repair of vehicles. So,
That was the first dormitory.
the second, then we had short-term. The first dorm was built for short-term. You had 2 bedrooms with, I think, 6 bunks or 4 bunks in each.
Yeah, whatever. Not very many.
But we needed a place where you could have someone that came for long-term, because a lot of people would come and they would spend all summer here.
They come from long distances to come here.
And so what we needed was a place where they could actually move in for months at a time, and that's what we had. And also, by having long-term people in that first dorm, you limited the classes that you could bring in. So we needed to have long-term housing and short-term housing, and that's the second dorm. Well, I think by doing the research and finding why a natural wetland was important, and then Linda and Gene in their outreach programs would educate the public to it. So it was like a two-phased. You do the research, then you do the outreach to get it out. And I think that's the thing that I would have to say, that some of the people that were dead set against us at the beginning have become some of our strongest proponents, because they found out why this is important. You know, particularly with the problems that we've had on Lake Erie with the toxic blue-green algae. You know, if we had not been so keen to destroy the Great Black Swamp, chances are there would not be an issue with toxic blue-greens. And it was just, just a general education, getting the research so the educators had something to talk about, rather than, kind of a wishy-washy type of a airy-fairy type of a thing. You'd say, well, because of it being here, X amount of phosphorus was removed and X amount of nitrate was removed. So I think it was kind of a two-phased process.
Gene, what kind of outreach did you guys come up with, to reach out to the public in the schools? What kind of programs did you run?
We went out ourselves to the schools. So Linda did, we did, and gave them a basic talk about what we are out here and how it's important to the towns and the community around here. And after a while, they began to believe us.
Was the Audubon Society, local society, up and running at that time? And
I don't remember.
I think they were.
Probably
They were quite active. But then they also had Sheldon Marsh, where they did a lot of their birding, but they would come here to do some birding too. We were we've always been on the winter bird count. Not being a birder, I'm not up on all of that, because my attitude was, if it's large enough to see with the human eye, I'm not interested in it. I like the microscopic things. So.
And if it flies, it's a waste of time.
That's right.
Whoa.
Hey,
Go away.
algae don't fly, so I don't care less about them.
Yes, that was.
did you manage other preserves other than Old One Creek in the first few years?
Old Woman Creek and Sheldon Marsh, and
DuPont Marsh.
DuPont Marsh, and later on the lady that was further that way.
Ann Augusta Olson.
Olson, Ann Augusta Olson had a
Vermilion River.
in the Vermilion River. Is that where her property was? We were just
You stretched pretty thin, weren't you?
we were just rooting around for anything we could find, supposedly, Well,
the thing is that the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves had a lot of nature preserves. They were reasonably small, but it was not a large division.
No.
So everyone had to do a variety of tasks. And as a manager, Gene was responsible for basically all the nature preserves in north central Ohio. So, but
Did that include mowing?
Mowing.
oh yeah.
Oh, Yeah, on with the tractor.
Yeah.
How about prairie management?
Uh,
Did you do-
burn the prairie, and get hell for it because people thought these guys are crazy. But they eventually, over time, with time and time again, Linda and us and others, still we kept telling our story over and over and over again, and it started to catch on, and people say, oh yeah, you know, they're doing some pretty good things there now. Gee, the railroad prairie doesn't burn anymore, so you can actually go back through there, and yeah, it's a real nice place. Whoopee, wow. Finally they figured that out. They were not the enemy.
How have your efforts helped increase funding for this area, for your Old Woman's Creek?
Okay, well, for research, we've never been able to offer researchers funding to come here. What we can offer is free housing, free lab facilities, and if, for example, they're doing a project, we can offer supplemental information that helps them interpret what they find. So that's kind of how we kept the research coming into here. And it's kind of interesting that one researcher has a good experience here, and he goes out and tells his buddies, and then they start to come here. So it's kind of built up, I'd say probably as much as anything, by word of mouth.
But that's right.
So.
Don't the Friends of Olden Creek provide support for interns every summer?
That's relatively new compared to the fact that we've been here for, what, 42 years now?
That's true.
Yeah, so, but initially we had some interns from Division of Natural Areas and Preserves that they would have interns here. In fact, the first year we had 3 interns here. And they helped build the lab in the Murray House. And then we were going out and we were sampling weekly to get water samples in the estuary and then up in the creek itself. So we had a baseline data. And then we applied for a grant in, gosh, 1980. It was one of the first grants we got to expand that. And we used the money to hire interns. So it was kind of the way we did it. But we have a database here that goes back to basically 1980. And that was one of the great things about this. In fact, we brought in data loggers, which as a person I can only go out maybe once a day to sample. This data loggers that will take out readings and temperature, oxygen, pH, and some of the basic parameters in water. They can do it every 15 minutes. And that's far more than I could ever be able to do. And we started putting those in there, and actually when they started coming in here, the database in NOAA really expanded. In fact, at one time they were talking about cutting back, doing away with the data loggers because, we only had about 10 years worth of data. And you know, they were thinking, well, we could use the money for other things. And the higher ups in NOAA said, no, that's one of the best and longest term real-time data collection programs that NOAA had. So, you know, it was one of those things that by doing something simple, that we've gotten this information. But the problems we have here are the same as they are across the country. The NARES program was actually set up because they were finding out that natural areas were along the coast were rapidly disappearing. And they wanted to have just a basic site that could see what were natural changes that were occurring and what were anthropogenic, human-caused changes that were occurring in the coastal areas and in the nearshore zone of the oceans. And this program was set up, and we were number 7 or number 8 in the program. We were as I said, we were the oddballs. But the whole thing was that they wanted to have a natural area that they could go back and look and say, you know, is this change that's occurring, for example, red tide? Was this a natural occurrence, or was this something that human activity caused? And so they just wanted, in each of the different biogeographic regions, they wanted at least one site that could use as kind of a benchmark. And it's very interesting. In the Great Lakes, they considered the Great Lakes all just one, so there was one site in the Great Lakes. And interesting, later on they determined that, well, each of the Great Lakes are different, so now there are 5 different biogeographic regions in the Great Lakes, because each Great Lake has its own biogeographic region. And along the coasts, they determined that each state could have one site for each biogeographic region in its that it was in. For example, the state of Florida has 3, because there were 3 biogeographic regions in the Great Lakes, or in Florida. And I think California has 2. Actually, they've got 3 now, but you know, again, it was the different biogeographic regions. So
Eleanor, and then because her car was blocked in and she couldn't get out, I told her that I would take her home in my car. And of course, that was a different thing than her expensive car. I think I had a Mustang at the time. And but nonetheless, I squeezed her into the car, and probably the fastest ride she ever, a 4-speed manual transmission, you know, and all that sort of thing. But she was real thoughtful about it. She thought that was very nice. And eventually, what did she eventually do for us? Big time.
Well, when you came here,
Here to Old Woman Creek.
she would ask you what you needed.
Yeah. And so she would give me money to help this place get started and better on, because the state wasn't exactly big on funding us. They have a place, but take care of yourself, so to speak. But Eleanor kept giving me money all the time. I guess all the time that I was there. Annually, she would meet me and talk about, what do you need this year? And how much would it do, and who would benefit from it? And every time I would be honest about it, I would tell her what I thought we needed and how it would work. And she'd send the money. Oh, she was a swell lady.
To help buy things that the state
couldn't afford to give us at the time.
I think she bought a lot of her funding bought a lot of the exhibits in the original visitor center.
And in the new visitor center too, I believe.
And she never saw this place for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And came once.
She came once.
Came one time, and then she thought it was great, you know, but she's helped us do this. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman. Oh yeah, one time somebody told me that there were deer hunters coming in at night on the south end of our property. And so I got my pickup, and my dog was Buffy. I had a big golden retriever, Buffy, and we went south here and got off along the railroad track and drove down, and sure enough, there were people standing all over this big woods, and they were apparently going to be shooting, you know, killing deer and stuff. So I had a microphone on my truck, big one, blasted it out, told them who we were, and that if anybody moved the wrong way, I'd turn my police dog loose on them. Buffy, never knew. And you talk about people clearing out in a hurry. I said, you got about 30 minutes before we start this. And buddy, they were gone. And it never happened again. But that old Buffy dog, she really took them out of it.
What about teenagers? You ever find teenagers out here?
Teenagers.
Yeah, in their cars, you know.
Oh, we have teenagers all the time, any place you're at. So, and it'd be day or night, and somebody would call me and say, you know, out there at here, there's some people sitting out there in their cars, and I think it's just people making out or drinking, whoever knows, you know. And so I started coming out then at night, and it didn't take long for me to thin that stuff out, you know, that they didn't want any citations because they didn't want their parents to know they were doing it. And so it's another one that Buffy and I took care of. Yeah. She was a honey.
Well, I would say the legacy for me is the fact that we have a much better understanding of a natural wetland, natural estuarine wetland like this than we did before we started. And the research coordinators that have followed me have been building on this legacy. We all have different areas of interest. And so, for example, mine was water chemistry and the microscopic plants, and followed by someone that looked at fish and kind of working up. So we're building an overall view, an overall understanding of what this area is and why it's important. We had a reputation.
Yeah.
Our site profile was massive compared to most of the others. And they felt that we had a Napoleonic complex because we were by far the smallest reserve. I don't think there's any reserve that's under, what, about 2,000 acres?
Yeah, except here.
We're 570 acres.
Yeah.
And so we had a Napoleonic complex because our site profile was much larger than any of the others. So they just felt that we just, you know. But in fact, I think one thing, can you get the site profile from the
It's in the car, my car.
oh, there's also, should be one in the library too.
Is it?
Yeah, just grab one. Because we had we were very unique in scientific literature. And the research coordinators ribbed me to no end about this. Because we were the only site profile. In fact, the only scientific publication that they knew of that had both a cover girl and a centerfold. The centerfold was a soils map of the watershed. And the cover girl was Bev Owen, who was a lab tech. We just had different. Thank you. Oh no, this is the management plan, site profile.
What's the second?
Let's see if I can help you
Yeah.
find it. Let's go look.
Hold on.
Well, while they're doing that, let me ask you about the archaeological dig that happened when they found Indian relics on the Enderley farm.
Okay.
Were you guys here for that?
It was done for the highway going through. The highway
You were
2.
still here.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we were still here. We didn't really get involved in it because, let's see, the Enderley was over on the Huron River, wasn't it? Yeah, it was on the Huron River. And that's where they determined that the Indians here were probably either Wyandotte or Delaware. The tribes that actually lived along the estuary, and there were some that lived along the estuary and the creek. We really don't know what tribes they were. We assume that they probably were either Wyandotte or Delaware because that's what was, 6 miles away. So, but we really don't know.
But you never found any evidence here in the watershed?
They've done some diggings here that they found remnants of villages that used to be here, but there were no burials here, so they couldn't determine what, because each Indian tribe seemed to have different burial process or practices, and therefore, you can't really identify what.
Which one was who, so to speak?
Okay, there should be a. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, this is it. Yeah, this is it here. There's our cover girl right there, Bev.
Bev Owen.
And this first edition of this was not. This is the second edition, but the first edition then. If you go to the. I ripped this off. There's our cover girl right there, Bev.
Bev Owen.
And this first edition of this was not. This is the second edition, but the first edition then. If you go to the. Our centerfold. this is the second edition. We went through and kind of cleaned up the first edition because we were under a time constraints because it took us. Okay, it took us about. There you go. It took us about 5 years to make the site profile because there's so much literature, and Ed and Ricky Herdendorf were great at going back and looking at previous literature and whatnot. So they were the ones that actually did a lot of the background work. I did more of the up-to-date things that were going on and some of the chemistry and things like that. That were more my area of expertise. But we went through, and as I said, when they came out with every reserve has to have a site profile, kind of a compendium of everything we know about the site up to that time. And I don't know, probably they're going to have to come up with a new one here fairly soon. But it was one of these things that by putting all this information together, then it serves as a background that if you have a researcher that comes in, you can just give them a copy of the site profile and say, this is what we know. And the researcher can then look at it and say, well, okay, I can see where my work will fit into it. And that's kind of, it's the site profile is a great selling point for research. And it's also a great selling point for education because it gives the educator all the knowledge that we have of the area and auxiliary information also.
What's the future of the estuary, the Old Woman Creek?
It'll always be a natural area, I think. And it's one of these things that the more we know, the more we find out. You know, the more we know, the more questions we develop. And I think that the research here will always continue. And it will be very important for determining the role of natural wetlands along the Lake Erie shoreline.
This has one of the better facilities, this complex here, that can accommodate a lot more research, visitation, all those different things can happen here. It spreads out among it, and it's no other place like it, probably.
Yeah,
exactly.
A great calling card for researchers is the fact that they can sample here and can work up their samples right here. They don't have to cart them back to Columbus, which is what, 3 hours away, or you know, Toledo or Cleveland, which is about an hour each way. So they can actually work on it here. If they find something unique, they can go right back out and sample again.
We have our dormitory across that way over by the lake that they can actually stay in. So it makes it pretty convenient. They can come actually stay on the site.
And the other thing is that climate change is rearing its ugly head again. And an area like this is going to be very critical in determining what it was like before and what it's going to be like
in the future.
In the future, yeah.
Is there anything particular about the fact that there's an island in the estuary?
Actually,
and that you may have already talked about that.
we did.
No.
Okay. The island in the center is kind of due to the fact that the channel would migrate back and forth. Before the railroad was there was a big wide open spot that they had to fill up and to bridge. But the channel used to migrate from one side to the other. And when it was far to the east, the channel went south of the island. When it was pushed far to the west, it went north of the island. And so, you know, the island is actually erosional. That it was not sediment coming in to build up the island. It was there used to be a lot there, and the channel going
it around.
both sides kind of have eroded out the island. It was kind of interesting in the 30s when Lake Erie levels were much lower. You could actually walk out to the island, and there used to be a farm on the island. It was the Daniels. Bill Daniels was a very respected wildlife photographer that or I should say natural photographer, that brought us stories about, he grew up on the island. His dad and mom actually ran a, what would you say, a small fruit farm there, that they had grapes and strawberries and blackberries and raspberries, and that they would harvest them and then take them up and put them in the interurban and run them to either Cleveland or Toledo. Because I think something I find very interesting was that with the interurban in early 1900s, you could go from here to downtown Cleveland in less than 45 minutes. You can't do that today. So, and that's because of the unfortunately, when the automobiles came and the interurban disappeared. But they would cart their fruit up to either there or to Salon Junction, which was not where we have Salon today, but was much farther north. In fact, the station is still, it's on the edge of the lake now, but it was the interurban depot, and so they would, the Daniels could cart their food up there and ship it out.
Is anything, has the preserve looked at the island as it has moved from farm to what it is today?
Well, by the time we looked at the property, you would look at a picture of it and you'd think it had been natural from the very beginning, because it was 79 when I first saw the island, and it was heavily wooded then. And the only thing was that we were always told, do not go into the island, because the house had a cistern, and no one knew exactly where the cistern was.
You might drown
So
in it.
they said, stay away from the island, because we didn't know where it was. And apparently they have now mapped it, and they know exactly where the cistern is. But that was the one fear, that you could keep people away from the island by saying, we don't know where it is. You may find it, but yeah, it's and it really is interesting, because it shows how quickly nature can recover. Because we have a picture of the house in the 30s, and I don't think there's maybe one or two trees in the entire island. If you look at it now, it's solid. But when we first started here, you could actually see some of the tiers that they put in for the grapes. But those have now pretty much disappeared too. Well, it's stabilized. I think it's stabilized the water levels in Lake Erie as much as you can. It's one of these things that nature always has the last call. And you look at it, when we started here in '79, lake levels were reasonably high, and they stayed through high until early 2000s, then they dropped, and now they're back up again. So it's Lake Erie has a cyclical pattern, high, low, and for the longest time it was like was it about a 10-year cycle, Nate?
Yeah, I think it was more than that. I
10 or 15-year cycle?
15 or 20.
Okay, 15 or 20-year cycle. So high water, low water, back to high water would be like a 20-year cycle. And the interesting thing was that the plants got used to that. When we came here, the water lotus was phenomenal. It was everywhere, and it was gorgeous. The big yellow flowers and whatnot. And in about 2000, they all disappeared because lake levels dropped. And unfortunately, that was about the time that Phragmites was coming into the system. And so Phragmites has basically replaced a lot of the water lotus. If you look at some of the early pictures that Gene took and some of the others took in the early 80s, all you see are just fields or just areas and areas of water lotus, just absolutely gorgeous water lotus. I mean, if you would have come back in 1998, it would have looked very much like the Huron painting. But it's interesting that one major change between this estuary on Lake Erie and marine estuaries, their oceans don't change in water level. Ours changes every year, very dramatically. So, you know, this system in Old Woman Creek is far more dynamic than any system you'll see along the coast, any of the marine coasts, just because our lake is, or our ocean is constantly changing on us in water level. And so where they can map vegetation once every 10 or 15 years, we have to basically map it every year if you want to see what's going on. And in the site profile, there's a good picture, again, of the change between 1999 and 2000. Tremendous change in the vegetation because lake levels changed.